Hello, and thank you for joining us here at Fair Talk by Fair Farms. My name is Amanda Higgins. Today I'm really excited to be joined by our guest speaker, Miss Stevi Howdle from Farmsafe Australia, who's going to be joining us to talk all things work health and safety on farm. Stevi, thanks so much and welcome.
Thank you for having me and for inviting me for this.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Stevi, you've been with Farmsafe for about 4 years now. Can you tell us a little bit about the organisation and what you actually do?
Yeah, so Farmsafe Australia is the industry peak body for farm safety. And so we are a membership organization that is made up of the commodity groupings, state farming organizations. We have medical professionals, we have researching bodies that are a part of our membership. So at this stage we have 24 members. So it's a really good grouping of professionals that come together to discuss the work health and safety issues in agriculture. They have a vested interest in it. And out of those 24 members, we have an elected board. So that board meets regularly to discuss trending issues, look at the landscape, talk about, what messaging we want to put out to continue to raise awareness, educate, and inform farmers on their work health and safety duties and obligations, but also just to provide industry-endorsed information to them that is relevant to the work health and safety duties on their farms and in their businesses, because as we know, agriculture is different from other industries like construction or mining. We have some similar styles of work, but we also have very, very different ways of going about our day-to-day. So that's what Farmsafe Australia is there to do, is to provide that awareness raising and messaging around work health and safety in the agricultural industry. But we also play a role in facilitating conversations from government, corporate agriculture, as I said, industry involvement in that, but also direct to farmers. So I get out and about, and you'll see me at field days and conferences having direct conversations with farmers, letting them know that we have resources online that they can access for free. I go direct to farm sometimes, which is
Nice.
A great part of my job, to be able to go out on farm and learn about what's going on the ground. I get to work very closely with our state and commodity members to find out what the issues are in their specific areas. And I get to work with a great marketing team to put out messaging that hopefully provides information and resonates with farmers to get them either thinking about specific issues or, I guess, letting them know that they're not alone in specific issues. So that's a big part of my role. And then also just having those government conversations around funding of projects in this area, research in this area, and just making sure that we continue to keep it front of mind, because it is really a fundamental aspect of every agricultural business. So.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly right. So we know that farms, forestry and fisheries are actually known as the fatal three. From that perspective, when we spoke the other day, we had mentioned, you had actually advised me that in 2023 we had a lower rate of fatalities than what we did in 2022. However, we've been off to a horrendous start for 2024. Can you tell us what that might look like and what those insights might be for such a bad start to the year?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to go back to 2023, because we do always want to celebrate the fact that we've seen a decrease, regardless of what has followed, which we will get into that conversation. But to know that, on average we were seeing, 55, 56 farmers dying on farm each year. And to see that cut to 32 in 2023 is significant. Yeah. And we do want to celebrate that, knowing that that a certain number of farmers
got to go home.
It's a really important achievement, and we want to see, obviously we want to see it down to zero. That would be, the goal that we're looking at. With regard to the start to 2024, it has been a really tragic start, and it's difficult to do the work that we do and be confronted with those numbers and those incidents. With 2024, I can only imagine the friends and families and the communities that have been impacted by these tragedies. We've seen 21 fatalities to date on farm in 2024.
That's not even halfway through the year.
Yeah, so it hasn't been tracking well, and hopefully we can turn that around, and hopefully we can continue to raise that awareness that we just need to be keeping safety forefront of mind every time we go out to do our jobs day in and day out. But yeah, really thinking about those families and those communities at this time, because it has been a really difficult start to the year.
So what are a couple of the top factors that are one of the leading causes in fatalities and serious injury?
So unfortunately, we see two tools that are very, very important to farmers continue to top the incidence of injury and fatality year in and year out, and those are tractors and quad bikes. They seem to, probably since 2010, but tractors a lot longer than that have been a leading cause. So unfortunately, and that crosses pretty much all of the commodities. I mean, you know, tractor use, quad bike use is prevalent across the board. It's not something that is commodity specific. So we really continue to raise awareness, and I know sometimes farmers are sick of hearing, you know, that tractors and quad bikes are up there, but the reality is we see them year in and year out. So really raising awareness of them as tools that, yes, they are necessary tools on farm, but they're also
The highest risk.
the highest risk, and we really need to be aware and trying to mitigate those risks as well as possible. With tractors in the past, it was often that we saw rollover being the highest rate of fatality and injury. It has been surpassed with rollover protection on tractors that came out in the late 80s. Runover has now been up there in terms of one of the reasons why tractors continue to top the stats. But so it's really about raising awareness about those two. But we also have to remember that any given day on a farm, we're dealing with a number of tools that can cause severe injury or fatality, and that we really have to keep in mind, you know, our processes, our procedures, our behaviors, and making sure that we as the humans who are operating these tools are thinking about the safest ways that we can use them to make sure that at the end of the day we're safe and well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You mentioned that FarmSafe, and I've been on the website and it's fabulous that you've got a great number of resources available to your members or to the general public.
To the
as
general
a matter
public,
of fact.
yeah.
Some of those things, like they cover things like the safe operation of tractors, they cover the safe use of quad bikes and SSVs. You've got one, I think it's just called Managing Farm Pressures. And that's all very well and good. But if we go back to the very beginning and we think about before you even step foot on farm, FarmSafe has an induction tool which can assist people in getting their employees or visitors or contractors actually inducted into some basic farm processes. Can you speak a little bit about what that tool looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually got two tools in the induction space, which is really great. And I'll talk about both of them. But as you said, we've got these resources and they're free to use across the board. You don't have to be a member or a member of any of our members to use these tools. But the reality is that all of our information is education and awareness raising. It's high level. It's not going to be specific to your farm. So any of the information that we have out there has to be tailored by you to be specific to your environment. So that's the first thing. We're not safety advisors and we're not legal experts. We are just raising that information. But when you jump online and you see our induction tool, so our induction tool can be accessed right from our website. And so the induction tool is a tool that can be used by both the employer and the employee, just to raise basic awareness of what you might find when you're about to walk out on farm for the first time. So it keeps the employer thinking about, oh yeah, I've got to remember that I need to mention that to the employee, or, you know, that's not relevant on our farm, so, you know, we don't really need to go through that in detail. But for the employee that may never have stepped foot on farm, it just raises awareness about really, really basic things. You know, it covers off on things like what to wear on your first day, and you know, potentially some questions that you might want to ask to make sure that you're getting all the information that's relevant to your well-being when you step foot on farm. But we make it really clear that the induction tool is a pre-farm induction.
Great.
Because, again, just hammering home that point that every farm is different, and you need to do a tailored induction for your workers so that they know what the risks and hazards on your farm are, because that might be different than those basic general things. You know, you might not have the same spiders to worry about or the same snakes to worry about as somebody else when you're thinking about environmental hazards, or, you know, the majority of that employee's work might not be done in the heat of the day. It might be at night, so it might be raising awareness of that, or so you really have to tailor what the role is and the induction that they do to that specific worker, and make sure that they're getting the information they need to be clear on their work health and safety duties and obligations, but also what's available to them. The other thing that the induction tool goes into in great detail is that consultation process, and making sure that induction isn't one way.
Yeah.
We're not just telling people.
That's important to realise, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's a communication.
It's communication, and it's having a conversation, and it's allowing space for your employees to ask questions, to raise their concerns, to say, maybe I'm not comfortable with this, you know, is there a different way we can do this? And that's really what that process is about. And that process then sets you up to build that safety culture, especially with that individual employee going forward, so that that employee feels comfortable coming to you when they have an issue, or they see something that they don't necessarily think is right. And it just helps to build that comfort level right from the beginning, to say, this is a safe space.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that
we value your safety.
Absolutely.
We want you to go home safely.
Yeah.
So, you know, don't be afraid of bringing things up too,
and that
which I
this
think
is a team
important.
environment. We need to do this together. So, so I think that's what we really try to get across in the induction tool, so that people are aware of that before they step on onto your farm, and they feel comfortable having these conversations. The other tool that we have just acquired, and a shout out to Primary Employers Tasmania, because they actually developed the tool. It's called the Ag Card.
Okay.
And it is more of a video style selection of modules that you can do, and it goes a little bit beyond work health and safety. There's some personal finance on there so that people can understand some personal finance things. There's just a couple of commodity specific modules on there that might be relevant. But there is a module for work health and safety that can be done and completed. That's really well done. So Primary Employers Tasmania is one of our members, and they wanted to see the Ag Card get elevated to that national level, so they handed it off to FarmSafe Australia, which was really fantastic to see the industry working together like that.
No, that is fabulous, because we know that induction is just so crucial, because common sense, you can't rely on it. It's one thing that it's just not so common, and you can't have an expectation that somebody who's going to be brand new onto your farm is going to have the same experiences and same knowledge as to what you've had over the last 12 years, 3 years, 5 years, 25 years on farm, right? The learnings are very, very different. So induction's really crucial, and it sets that tone that everyone's going to go home.
It does, and you're right about the common sense. It's one of the biggest, I guess one of my biggest pet peeves, to be honest with you, because common sense, there's a phrase, common sense isn't common. And so I use that a lot. But the reality is, when we think about the way that we're raised, environmentally, culturally, family to family, just you know, even socially, just the way that we're raised, some people are really, really okay with asking hard questions of
Sure.
anybody. They,
Yeah.
you know, they have no problem with it. Other people are really timid and really don't want to offend and don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
And we have to take these things into consideration when we're thinking, especially about work health and safety, but with so many other parts of our business when it comes to our employees. So remembering that all of our backgrounds are different, all of our experiences are different. Your idea of hard work is very different to somebody else's idea of hard work. You know, your idea of a pain threshold might be different to somebody else's idea of a pain threshold. So having
Tolerance to working in hot weather,
exactly.
fatigue,
Oh,
heat
being
stress.
a Canadian,
Yeah.
I don't handle, you know, the northern climate very
Yeah,
well.
we're not going to find you in Cairns anytime soon, right?
No, so I mean, it's remembering that there are differences and being able to work together to find solutions that work for each individual.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be onerous.
I think it does bring us to the point, though, that we've got many, many businesses and growers who are utilising overseas workers, whether they be backpackers or migrant workers from non-English speaking backgrounds. So I think that really goes to show how much more important solid induction is. Either documents being translated or videos, or how do you go about suggesting inductions for overseas workers? What's your thoughts on that?
So interestingly, I got a phone call actually specifically about this yesterday from a grower who was looking for translated resources.
Yeah.
And there's some work being done in the universities at the moment to look at this specifically in the horticulture industry to try to alleviate some of the concerns that are being seen through the PALM scheme and a few of those other labor hire programs that don't necessarily have adequate resources for growers that are using workforces that may not have English as a first language. And the other thing that we're talking about, though, too, with regards to translation is also the idea of literacy levels, because it's something that we don't talk about enough, is that not everybody has the same level of education and literacy. So handing someone a document and expecting that they're going to have full understanding of what that means and how that implicates their working environment isn't necessarily an easy thing to do in our workforce. So my short answer to that is there's not enough. There's not enough translated resources. There's not enough opportunities out there at this stage to just be able to hand a grower a document and say, this is great for a Tongan language or, you know. But unfortunately, that's the situation right now. The good thing is the awareness is being raised and there's work being done in the universities to try to properly translate these resources. And then there's also research being done on how can we make sure that these resources then are fully understood by the workforce, because that's the second side of it. We can hand a document to someone, they can tick a box. That doesn't mean they fully understood the process or the implications that that might have on their environment. So yeah, it's a body of work that needs to be done, and there needs to be investment into it, because we know that our workforce doesn't all have the same language, they don't have the same literacy levels, and we need to make sure that we're fully accommodating for all of that.
Yeah, I suppose from a practical perspective, to have a look at what businesses can do now, I suppose it is a matter of utilising their current team members who perhaps might be bilingual and getting them to adequately translate.
Absolutely.
Whether it might be utilising some video, you know, showing and demonstrating in a video format. Maybe then when someone can translate what's going on. Pictorials, what's your
Pictorials,
thoughts around that?
and those are all the things that are being discussed at this level is, you know, what is it that's going to have the most cut through? Is it having specific translators that are available to go out in this field, in the work health and safety field, to be able to help out in that area? Is it, you know, having the resources that are translated? And I think there's going to be a number of solutions that are going to have to work together, as there is, that's usually the case. You need to hit it from a number of angles. And I think the pictorials, video learning, because when people can see what other people are doing, that's a very, very good way of understanding how to do a process or a procedure correctly, is actually being able to visually watch someone else do it. So that video learning can be helpful. But again, it comes down to making sure that all of this translates into understanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's huge rooms for research in this area, investment in this area, and congratulations to those organizations. I know there are some out there that have actively started to go down this path. And
they have. It's great to see that people are really aware that just by putting it out in one format, or perhaps even like an initial induction meeting, that everyone's going to have the same level of understanding walking away from the end of it. It won't happen.
It doesn't happen.
And businesses are at risk in that instance then. So FarmSafe has a number of great resources, like we mentioned, and you've got things in there like toolbox talks and all that sort of jazz. And one of our registrants has said, how can we make toolbox talks more interesting, particularly if we're trying to talk about the same subject as a reinforcement? I note on there that you had like a facilitator's guide and that sort of stuff built into that. Can you speak a little bit about what that looks like there?
So those are a new improvement that we've just recently released on our Toolbox Talks, and I'm really excited about it, because one of the things in 2020 when we did the modernization of FarmSafe and the rebrand of FarmSafe, one of the things that we analyzed was the fact that we had a bunch of older, really great resources online, but they were like 40 and 50 pages.
Yeah, too hard to
and
digest.
A lot of information.
No one has time, right?
Exactly.
Who's gonna read it?
So we realized we needed to cut this down into some short, sharp toolbox talk style discussions. And so we put out the first iteration of them. And the feedback that we got from the farmers was, these are really great. It's great to have 1, 2 page, 3 page, documents. But we don't know how to run an effective toolbox talk. So we took that feedback on board and created the facilitator's guide. And the facilitator's guide runs through how to go through that specific topic, and a couple of questions that you could ask your team, that they can, actually have that consultation and communication about. But then also a couple of case studies, and they're really simple. Don't expect them to be, the high level, They're very, very simple things. So it might be something that it gives you an idea, and then you can tailor it to something that's very specific to your farm, so that it's more relevant to your workers. And I think in terms of the question about how do we keep having the same conversation, if we're continually talking about tractor operation or something like that, how do we keep that fresh and relevant? And I think that's part of the consultation side of things, throw it back to your team members and say, what do you notice on a day-to-day basis? What are you struggling with? What could we do to make this easier? Have you had a recent close call that we need to talk about, so that we can figure out, because close calls are really great ways of analyzing what's not working before you have an incident on your farm. So look at those close calls, ask for that feedback, and then your next toolbox talk could be, finding a solution to that issue, or workshopping, what went wrong and how you could do things differently. And that really helps you to reinvigorate your policies and procedures as well. So I think, yes, it's hard when you feel like, you might have an employee that's been there for 20 years and you don't want to hammer home again, let's talk about, tractor safety. But there is ways of engaging them that they feel valued, their voice is being heard, and they see that you're taking their knowledge and expertise on board in your decision making in your business.
Well, they're the ones doing the job often, a lot of the time, isn't it? So I think that's where that keyword consultation comes into it, that as an employee you can have a process or a standard operating procedure that you would like people to follow, but sometimes if for some reason it doesn't work like that on farm and employees constantly change, I think dive a bit deeper, work out why it's changing, and then maybe something needs to be adjusted in that process, because having it right and having a communication in a safe environment where it's all for the betterment of the business and for everybody involved is really important. Which brings us kind of to the Work Health and Safety Act and duty of care that employers have to ensure that they provide a safe working environment for employees. Notwithstanding the fact employees happen to have their own responsibilities underneath the Act as well to not behave in a manner which is going to put others or themselves at risk and not engage in those sorts of behaviours. So from a practical point of view, what do you think that means for employees at a behaviour level?
So I think that's a common misunderstanding when it comes to work health and safety, is everyone puts the onus on the employer without recognizing that each and every one of us has responsibility to ourselves and to everyone around us. You know, if I'm doing something, you know, just a little bit silly, or, you know, or I'm rushing, or I'm in a bad mood, I may be potentially putting someone else at risk. By
you might be that person on the tractor and just going gung-ho and...
Absolutely. So we all have a responsibility to each other, to our employers, and the employer has a responsibility to us, and it really is a team environment. And I think one of the big parts of that is looking at safety culture and talking about it as a culture, and ingraining safety as part of your everyday conversation, so that people recognize that, you know, it's not just on the employer to come around and manage things, because they can't be everywhere, especially on some of the bigger properties. You know, they can't be everywhere at once. So we really have to take it upon ourselves to make sure that we're calling out behavior that we see as unsafe, that we are voicing our concerns when we see something that isn't up to scratch, and that we're also recognizing that the implications could have far-reaching impacts on us as well. You know, somebody's behavior that I think, isn't it, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And to that effect, that standard that you've walked past could have an implication for you in the future. You could be the person who's injured by that behavior, or so it's just recognizing that we're all looking out for each other as well as for ourselves. And if we continue to have that attitude, I think it builds a culture that is deeply then ingrained in the business. And it really does, it's a more friendly place to work when you know that the person that you're working next to actually cares whether or not you fall off that ladder.
Yeah.
It's really important to know that someone's looking out for you, and they care that you go home safe at the end of the night.
Yeah.
So, and vice versa, you know, we talk about the golden rule all the time. Really, we just want to be treated the way, you know, we think about it from not only our own perspective, but we think about our children. You know, take care of, if our children went overseas to work on somebody else's property, we'd want them taken care of.
Yeah.
So let's take care of our employees, and it goes both ways. So yeah, it's just having that culture and building that respect and culture of care. And the reality is, that's one of the great things of the farming industry, working on farms, smaller towns. We all know each other, we all care about each other, and we just need to really make sure that that's put into practice in our businesses.
Yeah, no, there's some great tips there. We've been asked a specific question, and I know you and I had discussed this a little bit earlier, and it was, if a harvest crew are being transported around an orchard, how do you recommend that this is done safely? And that's kind of a how long is a piece of string, right? Because every property's
Every
different.
property is going to be very, very different in terms, and every commodity is going to have different requirements there. And obviously, you know, speaking with my FarmSafe hat on, you know, again, we don't provide advice. We provide that high level information and stuff. So if you went on to our website and looked at, you know, transporting people, we always recommend, you know, using seatbelts in vehicles, and making sure you're not riding in the trays of utes or SSVs and things like that, because one bump, you know, and you can come off, and that can be extremely fatal, never mind, you know, breaking necks, breaking backs. So there's, you know, there's a lot of risk assessment that needs to go into this sort of a question, but also a lot of understanding of your own terrain, what vehicles you use on your own property, speed limits, all of those sorts of things come into that conversation. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Just like anything with safety, you sort of have to go through the process of risk assessing and making sure that whatever form of transport that you're using, you're making sure that you're complying with the safety guidelines of that vehicle that you're choosing.
Yeah. It's all very individualised, isn't it, for each business and for each scenario. I don't think there's ever going to be a one-size-fits-all other than risk assess it and make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
From a technological advancement, because there's so much that's going on in the farm space as far as technology is concerned, does FarmSafe see technological advances as being beneficial to the industry in so much as could be something basic like electronic SDSs, you know, for chemical storage and that sort of stuff? How do you see technology, and do you see it being used beneficially in that regard?
So for the most part, yes, absolutely. Innovation and technology in this space and in all agricultural spaces is usually advancing our industry, which is fantastic. We always want to see that. Modernizing agriculture is, you know, is fantastic. Yeah, it is very exciting. But there's two sides to every coin when it comes to this. So we see innovation, you know, rollover protection on tractors actually cut the fatality rate globally by 72%. So, I mean, that's a huge innovation and a great work health and safety outcome that we saw from that. But with all of the things, drone technology, robotic spray rigs, you know, all of these things comes other policy complications that we need to work through. And, you know, we have to make sure that our policy settings and our legislation keeps up with that advancement so that we make sure that we're not creating other risks alongside the ones that we're being able to reduce because of the technological advancement. So, there's two sides to that conversation, but on the flip side, I mean, it's a very exciting space. And the more that we can reduce the impact of human error, I mean, that's really what we want to do is to see the ability to do our jobs without the impacts of, you know, a bad decision at the wrong time.
Yeah, that's right. Or not thinking an implementation through the whole way and realising that there are some hidden things behind the scenes that actually weren't taken into consideration. And you sort of think, geez, I wish I could turn back the clock now, and perhaps it's a little too late for that.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll see some really great advancements with some of the new technology coming into the space, but we just have to make sure at an industry level, at a government level, that we're taking into consideration any risks and hazards that are coming into the space because of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. We know that businesses that are part of a social compliance program have got to demonstrate a certain level of good practice in regards to the worker inductions and documentation and health and safety procedures and protocols and those sorts of things. How do you see social compliance programs being able to assist farms reduce and mitigate their risk?
So I think my answer to that would be that it's having that access to people and information that will help you along your journey, whether it's compliance-based, whether it's behavioral, whether it's building a culture in your own business. You have access to that information and those people who are there to help you, genuinely there to help you increase the productivity and social components of your business that are so important to attracting labor and retaining labor. So I think from that perspective, having access to that is really important, and that's what we try to do at FarmSafe, is provide access as well to farmers so that they really have that support in the background to feel confident going along these journeys, because they can be really complex and confusing sometimes. And so to have access to fair farms and be able to reach out and say, look, I'm a bit confused by this, can you help me? That's the first step, right? Is to have that ability
and awareness
to,
and to ask for help. I think that's the important thing.
And to know you're being supported by a genuine interest, you know, instead of someone who potentially is leading you down the wrong way.
Yeah, that's right. We know that as part of the Fair Farms audit process that one of the most common non-conformances that we come across in that work health and safety sector. And in some ways it's really great that that's identified at audit, because it gives businesses the opportunity to be able to remediate and take action, to be able to put different procedures and stuff like that in place. Some of the things that we see as that come up as common non-conformances are emergency planning and evacuation hasn't been tested. You know, there's not been a mock emergency evac with a register of people who attended. We see that electrical testing and tagging hasn't been completed within the due timeframes, sometimes if at all. Fire safety equipment hasn't been tagged and tested. Emergency exits potentially being blocked, you know. So the work health and safety component from our audit reports actually is quite high. With that being said, it's a great opportunity for businesses to then look internally to say, well, these are some of these early wins that I can actually take control of now before anything negative happens, and put practices and procedures into place to be able to help them move forward. And I think that as we see more businesses become part of a social compliance program, we will actually get to see some elevation through the industry and improved safety on farms with that.
I agree. I think that it's a very important part of the conversation and the business practices is having, you know, somebody come in and have a look at, because we're very blind to the way we do things. You know, we think, oh, we've gotten by, you know, this is working.
Yeah.
So it's great to have that set of eyes come through and do a audit for you. And from our perspective, I mean, you can never go wrong getting, you know, somebody to come through and have a look and give you that second set of eyes. And as you said, it gives you that opportunity to fix those things before they become an issue, which is exactly what we want to do. We want to prevent things from
prevention, isn't it?
We want to prevent these things from happening. We don't want to open ourselves up to it happening and then having to go back on top of dealing with the incident.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
an investigation.
Exactly.
And increased workers' comp claims and lost time to injury.
And just an injured person.
Yeah.
You know, that really comes down to the fact that we don't want to injure people. So
and it's not just that person that's impacted.
It's the
rest
community.
of the co-workers are impacted as well, you know.
Absolutely.
It's surprising that emotional impact on everybody else within the workforce too.
So to some extent, I think when you talk to growers and producers who haven't had these done, they get a bit nervous and they're like, oh, I don't really want someone going through. But the reality is these are really helpful, and work health and safety is a journey.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not expected to go from zero knowledge to best practice or whatever best practice, you know, is for your business in an overnight time frame. This is a journey. This is, you know, this gives you a roadmap of how can we continually increase our safety culture and improve the efficiencies on our farm, because the reality is work health and safety actually improves your productivity and your efficiency. All of these things actually streamline your operations and make them more effective.
Yeah.
So doing this helps your business, but it also safeguards your people and your business, your lifestyle, everything. So these are great to have these audits available, and that's from a Fair Farms perspective. But there's state and commodity groups that offer these as well, where they have work health and safety programs. VFF just did, I think, over 300 farm visits in the last 2 or 3 years, and Safe Farming Tasmania does this, New South Wales Farmers does this. It's a really great
There's resources
opportunity.
out there to access, isn't
exactly,
there?
that farmers have available to get a qualified safety advisor to come in, have a look, and just give you some opportunities to increase that and find out how really simple it is to go through this process. And it's much better to have these guys come in and do it than to have the regulator come in and do it.
Absolutely.
So these are resources that are out there for farmers, and they really need to reach out and check into them because they're great. And I mean, I get so much feedback at the national level about these state and commodity programs that are working, because farmers really appreciate it when they find out that it's not as scary and it's not as complex as they thought it was. And they're getting tailored advice for their farm, which is fantastic. So it's a great program to have access to.
Yeah, it is. I think really the key message is, at the end of the day, we want everyone to come home in one piece, and we want everyone to come home with all 10 fingers and 10 toes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really wonderful.
And the reality is too, is that we love what we do. You know, we don't want to not be able to go out and accomplish our day-to-day because of an injury. You know, 6 weeks off, you know, what does that do to your business if you're laid up in hospital or even on bed rest for, you know, a specific length of time? These are issues that we can try to prevent through, you know, just a little bit of conversation, a little bit of pain for a lot of gain in the, you know, in the long run. And I think it's worthwhile to really have a good look at the processes and just remember that the goal is it's a great goal to have, not having any injuries or fatalities on your farm.
Zero harm.
Yeah, exactly.
Stevi Howdle, Executive Officer of Farmsafe Australia, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to everybody who has joined us here at Fair Talk by Fair Farms. I look forward to you joining us next month at our next episode. Take care and goodbye for now.